Hello, and thank you for joining us for this joint webinar by PhoneGap creator Nitobi and Worklight. I'm Yoni Harif, Head of Marketing at Worklight. Today's session will focus on mobile cross-platform application development within an enterprise context. We're joined by Worklight CTO Ron Perry, a 20-year veteran with deep experience in mobile, web, and enterprise technologies, as well as Nitobi's Steve Gill, PhoneGap community champion, who's been leading the discussion on PhoneGap, one of the fastest growing open source mobile frameworks. This session will be given in two parts. The first will cover the main factors and challenges affecting mobile application development in the enterprise. We will discuss HTML as a foundation for cross-platform applications, as well as mobile architecture and infrastructure consideration. The second part will address how to solve some of these issues, and our speakers will share some different approaches and lessons learned from employing the PhoneGap Worklight approach. Please, I encourage you all to submit questions through the webinar console at any time, and Steve and Ron will address these at the end of the session. We have quite a bit of people joining us, so I hope we can address all these questions, and if not, we will follow up. But first, a quick introduction to PhoneGap and Worklight. With over 500,000 downloads of its popular open source code, Nitobi's PhoneGap is one of the fastest growing mobile frameworks in the market today, enabling developers of all types to use HTML5, CSS, and JavaScript to develop rich applications across all major smartphone and tablet devices out there. We'll see some of the magic behind this technology in a few minutes. Worklight, which is a proud member of the PhoneGap community, provides a mobile application platform and associated tools that address the entire life cycle of an enterprise mobile application. Worklight enables organizations to develop, run, and manage HTML5, hybrid, and native apps across devices. Its technology bundles in PhoneGap, and we will see how that is done and what are the added benefits that Worklight provides the enterprise. And with that, I'd like to introduce Ron Perry, Worklight CTO.
Thanks, Yoni. Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining. And since today we'll be talking about app development in the enterprise context, the first question that we should answer is development in the enterprise context really different from development in the non-enterprise context? So the answer is that while some considerations hold for both enterprise apps and non-enterprise apps, some tend to be more important for casual app developers, while others are more important when the app is being developed by an enterprise. For example, 3D graphics and in-app purchases tend to be more important for game developers, while data security and integration with authentication protocols like Kerberos are usually things that enterprises care about much more. It's also important to note that enterprise-related apps can be divided into three categories: employee-facing, partner-facing, and customer-facing. Some of the considerations tend to be more important for customers or even partner-facing apps, for example, creating a cool look and feel, while others, like single sign-on, are more important when you're creating an app for your employees. One of the things that are really crucial for enterprises is having their apps work on multiple operating systems. In the customer or partner-facing scenario, this is a no-brainer. If you're a bank, an insurance provider, a retailer, or any other service provider, you can't control which devices your customers have. And since your customers own advanced devices like iPhones, Android, or soon Windows Phone 7 devices, they expect apps. And they will be very disappointed if you offer your time-saving or service-enhancing app for other modern device, the one that they didn't purchase. So obviously, you'll want your app to work on all the devices that are popular within your customer base. The same is true for partner-facing apps. You have no control over the devices that your partners use. What may be a bit surprising to some is that cross-platform support is also becoming more and more relevant in the employee-facing app scenario. The reason for this is that many corporations are adopting a bring-your-own-device-to-work policy. That is, instead of paying for the mobile devices that the employees use, companies are allowing employees to purchase the device of their choice and use that device to connect to the enterprise systems. This is true for mobile phones as well as productivity-enhancing tablet devices. A recent survey by Forrester found that 86% of IT departments provide at least some level of support for personal mobile devices, whereas only 10% do not allow any use of personal mobile devices. So in a very significant amount of enterprise app situations, having your app work on multiple mobile platforms is a key consideration. And naturally, you'll want to do that in a cost-effective manner. And that applies not only to the initial development, but to the ongoing maintenance process as well. The unavoidable outcome of having to support an app on multiple platforms is the consideration of a cross-platform technology. Of course, you can always decide to rewrite the app for each target mobile OS, but this is extremely expensive and only recommended in rare situations. So I'd like to mention the top enterprise considerations when choosing a cross-platform technology, whether for a single app or as a strategic IT decision. First of all is the question of whether the technology of choice can be used to create the user interface that you're looking for. If you have a specific design in mind, you want to make sure that it can be implemented using that technology. The next issue is whether the user interface you create will feel natural to your users. If you're targeting both BlackBerry and iPhone users, you would want the iPhone version to be touch-friendly, while the BlackBerry version should be easy to use with a pointer and keyboard. Furthermore, due to App Store and other deployment considerations, you may want a single downloadable app to work on mobile phones as well as tablets, so the app may have to adapt its user interface to the device it is running on. Another important issue is how long will it take your developers to learn the cross-platform technology and whether they can use their existing know-how or not. You must also remember that initial development of the app is only the first step, and you're very likely to want to continue enhancing or at least servicing the app over time. So will the cross-platform technology you choose keep up with the rapid advances in the mobile landscape? Or is that technology dependent on a single vendor that may not be able to support new mobile devices as they come out? And will you be able to find new developers or contractors that are familiar with your technology of choice after the original developers of the app are no longer available to maintain it? So another important consideration for selecting cross-platform technology is the ability to tap hardware capabilities of the mobile device or special services exposed by the mobile OS. The hardware built into mobile devices has an amazing potential for enhancing the traditional customer-facing services that are offered by enterprises. Mobile check deposit is a great example of how the phone's camera can be used for such a purpose. Branch lookup enhanced by GPS is another, and near-field communications will soon open up a huge amount of opportunities. And employee-facing apps also benefit from mobile hardware capabilities. For example, many apps improve productivity by including features like QR code reading functionality, push notifications, or location sensitivity. And no matter which cross-platform technology is used, one of the most important things in an enterprise context is integrating the mobile app with the data infrastructure of the company. In the enterprise, apps are yet another extension of the computing infrastructure. So like web and desktop apps, they must be connected to the relevant data systems. When designing a mobile app, the enterprise cannot just concentrate on the app itself, but has to design an architecture that takes into consideration how the app receives data from the backend systems and how it inputs data into those systems. The considerations here include ease of development in accessing backend data from multiple mobile OSs, user experience, the potential delay experienced by each user, scalability, the ability of the system to support hundreds of thousands of users or even more, all of them communicating with the backend. And these considerations affect architectural decisions like in what format will the mobile device receive and send data? Will it be binary, XML, JSON, or something else? And will that format play nice with the cross-platform technology that you selected? For mobile apps that need to communicate with multiple backend systems, should the app open a different connection to each backend system, or should the data go through a dedicated server first? And beyond that, ensuring that the app can access data in offline mode, that is when the device is not connected to the network, is also very important for many apps. Consider, for example, an app that lets insurance agents collect information from potential clients. Such an app becomes an essential work tool and cannot rely on having connectivity 100% of the time. The insurance agent must be able to obtain data when in front of the client, even if there is no 3G connection at the moment. and then transmit the data back to the back end when the connectivity is restored. Of course, deciding on the data format is very important, but keeping the data safe is probably even more important. Access to enterprise data is almost always restricted by one or more authentication mechanisms. So whatever data integration architecture is chosen for the mobile app, this architecture must incorporate integration with the authentication infrastructure so that the app will be able to access the data. In many cases, this is not as simple as it may sound, because a cross-platform library for the authentication protocol that you need may not be available. Moreover, if your app provides access to sensitive systems, such as health information systems, sensitive corporate data, or e-commerce engines, then you should make sure that potentially malicious software running on the mobile device isn't able to steal user credentials during or after the login process. Technologies that can help with such regard include anti-key logging precautions, on-device encryption mechanisms, and jailbreak detection libraries. Multi-factor authentication is also a common requirement by enterprises. Many organizations want to use the physical mobile device as the what you have factor in two-factor authentication, and take special action when a user account is being accessed from an unrecognized physical mobile device. An additional issue that is common, especially when developing employee-facing applications, is single sign-on, meaning allowing multiple enterprise apps to share a single login session so that the user will not have to re-enter the credentials over and over again. We already mentioned earlier that many mobile apps are expected to function even in offline mode, which creates a couple of security-related complications. First of all, there's the need to authenticate users when the device is not connected to the online authentication infrastructure. Beyond that is the need to secure sensitive cache data and prevent access to it by unauthorized users or malicious software. Remember that mobile devices tend to get lost or stolen more than personal computers do, so there's a greater risk of data theft from the device. And mobile devices are not at all immune from viruses, Trojan horses, and other malware designed to steal sensitive data or perform unauthorized actions on behalf of the user. Mechanisms that can help reduce the likelihood of successful attacks include encryption of cache data, jailbreak detection mechanisms, and including the ability to remotely block access to sensitive data from devices that have been reported as stolen. Another area requiring attention is the software development process itself. Enterprises doing in-house software development have existing processes in place, but these are not necessarily adapted to mobile app development. And not all mobile development tools are designed to be incorporated into such processes. For example, apps for iPhones and iPads can only be compiled on Macs, making inclusion of app development in the enterprise processes challenging for some companies. Furthermore, when you get to the stage of testing or compiling or testing your app, each mobile OS requires the use of its own SDK, compiler, and simulators, adding another challenge to cross-platform development efforts. Not to mention that these tools and SDKs are updated by the mobile vendors very frequently, so including the compilation of mobile apps in your continuous integration system is both highly recommended on one hand, yet somewhat challenging on the other. Another thing to remember about mobile development is that it is a multidisciplinary process, which involves cooperation and sharing of code between different developers which have different expertise. Even when you're working with a cross-platform technology, there are situations where you may want to add some platform-specific native code to your app. And since each mobile OS has a different set of development tools and languages, native development for one OS is not usually done by the same developer that wrote native code for another. So to ensure productive and efficient team development process, enterprises need mechanisms that simplify the mutual work done by developers with different skill sets. One more thing to remember about mobile app development is that QA and beta testing require a different process than that of traditional web-based software. If you're using cross-platform technology, you will still have to, even if you're using cross-platform technology, you will still have to test your app on different devices and in different real-world situations. And if your app communicates with back-end servers, you may need a way to control the target servers. For example, you'll want to point the copy of the app installed on one tester's device at the staging server where there's whereas another tester will want to work against the live server. And this is actually more challenging than people realize early on. And of course, you'll need a convenient way for developers to deliver new versions of the app to the QA team and to the beta testers, because at this stage, the app isn't on the App Store yet. Moreover, you'll need mechanisms that let the developers diagnose problems encountered by the testers on devices that the developers can't necessarily physically reach. And speaking of devices that you can't reach physically, our last set of enterprise considerations for today is related to what the enterprise needs to do with custom-built apps after they've been installed on customer or employee devices. Since we're dealing with software, you can obviously expect that users will experience problems. Being able to support your users requires some planning ahead, as you'll want to have mechanisms in place to help you diagnose their problems. For example, you may want to include appropriate server-side logging of user actions in order to understand what the user did prior to encountering a problem. You may also want to include some client-side functionality to let users send diagnostic information back to technical support, and be able to do that even in cases where their app fails to connect to your servers for some reason. Another mechanism that many companies require is analytics, because understanding what your users are doing with your app is very important in order to continue improving it. And I'd like to conclude our list of enterprise considerations with yet another interesting post-deployment issue. Sending software updates to users, or at least forcing your users to update to a new version of the app, especially in situations such as fixing critical security flaws or deprecating some backend service. The industry received a powerful lesson about this need a little over a year ago when Citibank corrected a critical security flaw in their iPhone app, but had to resort to sending letters by mail asking their customers to upgrade to the new version. With the benefit of that hindsight, we know today that companies should plan ahead today so they will be able to force updates tomorrow. This is true for both employee and customer-facing applications. And in the era of bring your own device to work, the two scenarios have more in common than is initially obvious. So, as you can see, there are quite a few issues to address when developing an enterprise mobile app. I hope this list helped at least some of you in any planning processes you may be conducting with regard to mobile apps. Let's now examine a few aspects of how these enterprise concerns are addressed when PhoneGap and Worklight are used. In the combined PhoneGap Worklight solution, the two components play different parts. Actually, PhoneGap and Worklight are two different things. PhoneGap is a set of libraries and SDKs, while Worklight is a platform that, beyond using PhoneGap as a core technology, also includes a runtime server, development tools, and more. PhoneGap is the technology that is used for addressing the issues associated with cross-platform development. It provides client-side runtime functionality that allows downloadable apps to use HTML5 and JavaScript as the cross-platform technology, while also letting the JavaScript code access mobile device APIs. The Worklight platform deals with the issues of back-end integration, including security and authentication. It also includes development tools optimized for organizations and provides runtime functionality for post-deployment control of apps. I will now hand the microphone over to Steve from Toby, who will tell you more about PhoneGap itself. And then we'll go back to take a quick look at the Worklight-based enterprise architecture for PhoneGap-based apps. Steve?
Hey, how's it going, guys? Give me 1 second. Let me just get my screen up and going.
Okay. In the meantime, let me answer one of the questions I see here. How does Worklight and PhoneGap compare to Sencha Touch? Sencha Touch is another player in this combined architecture, and both platforms are compatible with it. You can write an application using Worklight, PhoneGap, and Sencha Touch, each one providing a different set of functions. Sencha Touch concentrates on providing the user interface look and feel. PhoneGap provides the device integration, and Worklight provides the enterprise context. The next one is, will this Worklight PhoneGap work with PHP now or in the future? This one, PHP is a technology that is optimized or optimal for server-side rendering of user interfaces. Both platforms are able to support apps that have a component of them written in PHP, but PHP is not really optimized for client-side rendering of user interfaces, because you have to do, in order for the app to work offline, you have to do much of the UI work on the client side. So you need the UI to be written more in JavaScript than in PHP.
Yeah, just to add on to that point, like PHP won't run on your phones. Like Ron was saying, it's a server-side language, so you need to run it on a server. You can communicate with it using, XHR, Ajax, whatever you want. But on the phone, you're only using HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. All right, so let's get started with the PhoneGap portion of this. So hopefully you guys have all heard of PhoneGap, and Ron talked a little bit about it, but I'm gonna dive in a bit more, and let's go from there. So the first question I'll be answering is, what is PhoneGap? I'm sure some of you have that question. The most high-level way of explaining it, and this is how I always like to start, is that it's essentially a mobile web app made with HTML5, CSS3, and JavaScript, and it runs on all of the platforms. So you guys can see some of them right there, but it's a mobile web app that's running natively on your phone, and it has the ability to use some of the native functions. So just to show you guys what's going on, there's a single code base, and you use PhoneGap, or you could use PhoneGap Build, which I'll talk about later, to deploy to these multiple devices. So you can do phones, tablets, computers. The next piece I'm going to talk about as well is PhoneGap plugins, which give you access to functionality that PhoneGap doesn't expose. And also there's JS libraries, so that includes Sencha and jQuery Mobile and a bunch of other ones. And you can use all of those. Because you're using web technology, you can use any JavaScript framework out there that you prefer. And IDEs. And this is another point. With PhoneGap, you can use any IDE you want. You can use TextMate, Notepad, Eclipse, Xcode, whatever you feel comfortable in, you can use. Just to talk a bit more about the single code base, the whole point of that is the one thing that all of these phones and tablets and stuff have in common is that they all have a good browser. And so when we were making PhoneGap, we originally thought, we don't want to have to write, an Objective-C in Java and all these different languages. We want to just be able to, leverage our web development skills and make apps. And then we realized that since they all have a browser, they all have like a pretty advanced browser, we could just write this web app and make PhoneGap to get access to everything else that we need on the phone. So here are just some differentiators from PhoneGap. It runs on more platforms than our competitors. It's got an open community and lots of contributors. You can use the same code that you do for your app also on the web. So you can have a web and app with the same code. It's just much easier to maintain. And there's tons of framework and tool support. Here are some of the supported platforms: iOS, Android, BlackBerry, WebOS, Symbian, Bata, Windows Phone 7. We just included support for that, and in the next version of PhoneGap, which should be coming out probably early next week, Windows Phone 7 will be included. Here are just some of the benefits. I've already kind of mentioned them, but I'm going to go over them a little bit more now. So one code base, multiple platforms, and that's huge when you're developing for the enterprise, or just in general. If you want to target as many platforms as you can, it could be very time-consuming to write in multiple different languages, and porting could be a hair-pulling experience. But PhoneGap definitely makes this much easier. You can reuse existing web developer skills. A lot of people. There's a lot of web developers out there, and this is just opening up the potential of what they could do with those skills. Shorter learning curve, like I said, you only have to learn HTML5, CSS3, and JavaScript. Faster development, you only have to write the code base once and do some tweaks for each platform. Mobile site app with the same code, I already talked about. Let's just jump around. It's based on open standards, so that means when we're designing PhoneGap, we work really closely with like the device API working group, and it's a really big deal to us that everybody follows standards. A lot of web developers have gone through a lot of pain having to develop for IE6 back in the day, and they had to essentially make one website that would work on IE6 and one that would work on Firefox, and that only happened because people weren't following standards. Now the standards are really starting to be pushed all over the web, and we're definitely leading that push as well. And there's multiple large stakeholders. This is just my standard space slide, and I've already kind of gone over it. But just another goal of PhoneGap is to not exist. Like I said, we're working with the Device APIs and Policies Working Group, the DAP, and we've helped kind of define, the Contacts API, and we use a lot of the APIs that they define, and we're very we have a lot of ins there to kind of discuss and help plan it. And PhoneGap's eventual goal is to not exist. It's the PhoneGap API that we've created right now. We would love to see that eventually make its way to all the browsers. So currently, you can already do geolocation in your browser, but if you want to use the camera in your mobile Safari or your Android browser, you can't do that. That functionality isn't exposed to the browser. You could do it with PhoneGap in a PhoneGap app, but what our eventual goal is to get that functionality exposed to the actual browser and not have to even exist. Here's just a slide of some of the new features that HTML5 came out with, which is really helped grow PhoneGap and just the web in general. It's definitely the right steps. So now Canvas is defined. Web SQLite database. That means you can just use the SQLite database in your applications now. No need to use any of the native databases. Geolocation's already included. History manipulation, so you can change what your back button would do, and then they got the video tag and the audio tag, and there's much more. You can look up that. There's tons of there are a lot of guides online that you can look at that have more information about HTML5. Here are just some of the APIs that PhoneGap has. Accelerometer, camera, capture, compass, connection, contacts, device, events, file. That's a pretty good one. Geolocation, media, network, notification, and storage. And you can check these out in more detail at docs.phonegap.com. Plugins. So just a quick talk about plugins. So I just showed you all the APIs most of the APIs that PhoneGap exposes. And if there's any plugin that we don't expose, and we have our reasons, I'll explain those in a second too, but any plugins, any API that we don't expose, we've developed a plugin architecture. So anyone can make a plugin, and these are written in the native language. So they'd be written in Objective-C and Java and whatever language you guys are using, and they give you access to things that PhoneGap doesn't. For instance, native controls is one that for the iPhone, it'll give you access to the tab bar at the bottom. Some people still want to use that tab bar, and you can insert that plugin into your code and use the tab bar. The reason why things like this aren't included in the PhoneGap core is because with PhoneGap, we try to hit the lowest common denominator. We try to hit all the APIs that are supported across all the platforms. So when you are taking your code base and moving it over, it's much simpler than if you have a lot of specific code to one platform, which would make it difficult to port over. Here are the licenses of PhoneGap. It's coming in as MIT and BSD and going out as Apache. This pretty much just means you guys can do anything you want with it. Use it commercially, sell it, there's no restrictions on it. Just do what you want with it. Just talking a little bit about community now. So PhoneGap, it's been getting big. There's over 600,000 unique visits a month right now. And there's over 60,000 downloads a month. Those numbers are huge right there. If there's any indication, PhoneGap is just getting bigger and bigger. And if there's a good time to jump on the PhoneGap bandwagon, now is it. Let's just do a little bit about apps. So these are just some of the companies that are, some of the bigger companies that are using PhoneGap currently to do their in-house development. You got IBM, you got Adobe, you got HP Palm, Sabre, Logitech. You guys can see some of these. Emulators. So tools are an important part about PhoneGap. Any developers love tools, and PhoneGap's got tons of them. Emulators. So there's a Ripple emulator, which the guys at RIM own now, but it's solid. It's got skins for all the different mobile phones out there, so you can test your iOS, your BlackBerry, your Android devices on there. And then there's also simulators that come with every single SDK you download. So if you install the iOS SDK, you get the iOS simulator, and then you get with the Android SDK, you get the Android virtual devices, etc. And that it's really handy to test in these simulators, but at the end of the day, we still always recommend testing on devices. It's never the same experience. Debugging. Winery just got donated to the PhoneGap project, and what Winery does is it allows you to do remote debugging. So you could set up an instance of Winery, put the application in your phone, whichever app you're doing, add a script to it, and you can do remote debugging, essentially using Web Inspector from your computer, and you can see the changes happening on your phone. It's quite amazing to see. IDEs, already talked about it. Pretty much use whatever you want. Dreamweaver is a good one. PhoneGap is built into Dreamweaver. Here are just some of the JavaScript libraries. You see, jQuery, jQuery Mobile, Sanchez in there, XUI, Joe, and a few others. Here are just some resources I wanted to give you guys. So the project can be found on github.com/PhoneGap. It's all open source. You can take a look at it, contribute. Bugs, we also track our bugs there. Docs.phonegap.com, that's a good one to, if you're just starting to use PhoneGap. It's really well laid out, and it's got lots of examples. Wiki.phonegap.com, this one, it's constantly being added to and worked on. It's a community-driven wiki. Support, so we got groups. We got a Google group mailing list that people use, and there's also community.phonegap.com, and we also have the IRC channel, which I sit in regularly during work hours, and so it's irc.freenode.net, and that's really popular as well. And one of the last things I wanted to talk about, which I kind of mentioned earlier, was PhoneGap Build. PhoneGap Build is our solution here at Nitobi to build in the cloud. So say you don't want to have to install the iOS SDK and the Android SDK and the BlackBerry SDK and the Symbian SDK and the WebOS. You guys understand my point. There's a lot of things you have to download, a lot of setup. With PhoneGap Build, all you have to do is point it to your GitHub repository or upload your index.html file, and it'll actually build all of the files for you and just give you an APK ready to be downloaded onto your Android phones, an IPA. Everything compiled and ready to download and install. So it skips the whole process of having to set up your machines and doing all of that. And it also, it makes it easy to share among employees and coworkers as well. So if you guys want to check out PhoneGap Build, it's still in beta. Just go to the website and you can register for a beta key. They're given out pretty fast. And Worklight also has a centralized build solution, and I believe Ron was going to speak a little bit about it.
Yeah, thanks, Steve. The build service from Nitobi is a great solution for developers who need an easy-to-use cloud-based system. For those companies who are looking for a powerful in-house build system that integrates with existing ALM or continuous integration environments, Worklight offers a centralized build mechanism which is installed within your own infrastructure. The Worklight build mechanism routes code between computers so that iOS projects, for example, are compiled on a Mac, whereas Windows Phone apps are compiled on Windows and so forth. This mechanism provides a controlled build environment for multi-platform apps that keeps the source code within the boundaries of the organization and is already integrated with leading ALM solutions such as IBM's Rational Team Concert. Back to you, Steve.
Well, that's the end of my slide deck. I'm going to stick around and answer questions at the end here as well. But just summary, check out PhoneGap if you haven't. It's awesome. If you guys want to ask me questions, if you don't get a chance to ask me questions at the end here, you can always hit me up on Twitter. I'm at _Steve Gill. Back to you, Ron.
Thanks, Steve. Okay, so now let's, I wanted to take a look with you at how you can connect a PhoneGap-based app to the back-end systems of the enterprise. Remember that PhoneGap apps have most of their logic written in JavaScript. So the trivial way one might approach this task, the connectivity task, is to simply write the app so that it performs AJAX requests directly to the enterprise backend systems, just like a web page might behave. And this can work. It requires the backend to expose an appropriate web service, but that's a very trivial thing to do. But what happens when you want to change the API of the web service? Remember, we're not dealing with a web page that can easily be updated on your user's browsers. In the web world, when the web service API changes, you update the JS code on the web page, and all visitors get the latest version immediately. In the world of downloadable apps, when the backend APIs change and you modify the app accordingly, your users still have to manually download the new version of the app, and you will have to maintain backwards compatibility on the server side as long as there are active users out there who didn't download the latest version and are using the previous one, and this can really take a long while. Another issue related issue is that if data is represented in XML on the server, then processing it on the client becomes cumbersome and may hurt the performance of the app. It's much easier to get the data in JSON, so in JavaScript object notation. So this architecture may drive you to modify the backend services to support JSON. And integration with the authentication infrastructure is also not trivial in this architecture and may add significant complexity to the client-side code. Certain authentication protocols, for example, Kerberos, don't have any existing JavaScript implementation, so using them with PhoneGap becomes problematic, and you may have to include native code for that. And another limitation with this architecture is that it does not provide the ability to remotely disable a stolen device. Two-factor authentication isn't easy to add either, because it requires the ability to pair a specific device with a specific user account. So where do you hold this database? And speaking of pairing devices with user accounts, integration of the backend service with push notifications is not easy because it requires exactly this sort of pairing, not to mention that each mobile OS has its own push API and unique restrictions. So a good way to address all those issues is to include a mobile middleware between the mobile devices and the backend services. A primary component of the Worklight platform is the Worklight server, which is exactly that, a mobile middleware. For the client side, we provide a set of libraries that work together with the server to provide enterprise functionality. Those libraries include PhoneGap to allow cross-platform development, but also provide APIs for data integration, security, encryption, diagnostics, post-deployment control, and so forth. So let's quickly examine some of the functionality and understand how the client and server each play a different part in the implementation. So first of all, authentication. The client side includes a local implementation of login forms, device identification, and so forth. The server provides the actual integration with the authentication infrastructure. So for example, the server provides Kerberos authentication to the backend, not the client, and the server maintains a mapping between the backend authenticated sessions and the status of logged in users on mobile devices. Integration with data representation is also taken care of on the server. The server communicates with multiple backend systems and translates the data from those systems into streamlined JSON representation, which is, again, very efficiently processed by the JavaScript code running on the client with the help of PhoneGap. Integration of backend services with push notification services is mostly done through the server. The server maintains a mapping between device IDs and user accounts and provides a unified API that makes it very simple for the backend systems to initiate push notifications without having to keep track of which user is running on Android and which user is running on iPhone. Forcing users to update to a new version is also a feature that requires cooperation between server and client. So when an administrator disables a specific version of the app, that information is stored on the server. And when a client app of that version contacts the the server refuses to handle the request, but it returns an error code and a message to display to the user. The error code is parsed by the Worklight client-side library, which displays a notification to the user and then forces the app to exit. There are many more such features, either available now or coming soon, but since we want to leave a bit of time to answer your questions, I won't get into the details right now, but you're more than welcome to contact us for more information.
Thank you, Ron, and thank you, Steve, for a very thorough session. We do have quite a bit of questions, and we'll try to address those as we can, time permitting. The first question relates to native app development versus cross-platform development. Questions is, are pure native applications developed different? What is the difference between a native app developed with Objective-C for iOS? Is there any difference in performance or functionality between a native app and a cross-platform app developed through these tools?
Yeah, I'll answer that. So just to kind of reiterate how PhoneGap works is that it's a native app that's launching the UI web view, which is essentially, if you want to think about it, kind of like a Chromeless browser for the phone. So mobile Safari without, you know, the bottom toolbar and the top toolbar. And it launches that, and it launches your HTML5, CSS, JavaScript files locally. And there is native code to the app as well that we include. That's what like the PhoneGap template is. When you use PhoneGap, you're using the native code that we supply essentially. Performance-wise, you can make them just as fast as native apps. You can have terribly slow native apps as well. It just depends on how you develop, and you know, there's tricks to make it more performant and tricks to make it worse, just like any kind of development. In that sense, I hope that answers that question.
One more thing I'd like to add is that applications can also combine, applications written in PhoneGap can combine web screens with native screens. So some of the apps that have been written using Worklight and PhoneGap include a lot of HTML-based screens and a few native screens which are platform-specific that provide one example that we like to show. It's very nice. Is an application that has an augmented reality feature. Has about 100 screens written in HTML and 1 or 2 screens which are native that include functionality that cannot be achieved directly in HTML. So it's very easy to combine the two technologies together in the same app.
Mm-hmm. And on that note, that's essentially kind of what plugins are for PhoneGap. You could, if there's native code you don't have, you could write that native code and then write a JavaScript interface for it and still use it on the JavaScript side. But it's just another layer that you have to go through.
Great. Another question, I guess, is a very good tag-along. How much of your code do you still have to customize for each platform, for each type of device? It's similar answer to the last one. It just depends on how you developed it. For me, sometimes I write an app and the CSS will look really off compared from one app to the next. There are a few worries you have to worry about. The Android browser isn't as good as the iPhone one, so some things that might work in the iPhone one might not work or look good on the Android one, and things like that. And for those that's just differences in WebKits, and to deal with that, you just do a little bit of tweaking. We generally, when we're porting, as long as there's no plugins or native code involved, we could port within a day easily to multiple platforms. You could use build and build the app, and it'll just output it in multiple platforms. Obviously, you might have to do a few CSS tweaks. Is pretty much what I'm getting to.
And but one of the features that the Worklight development development environment provides is the ability to keep those slight modifications in the same code base. And those we call them platform-specific optimizations for the user interface. And these are not always just because the browser doesn't behave exactly the same, sometimes you actually want the application to look a little bit different on Android and on iPhone because the UI elements that your user expect would be different. And if you're also targeting BlackBerry, then you may want to have the BlackBerry UI optimized for keypad, and the iPhone and Android UIs optimized for touch. And by the way, one of the there are also JavaScript libraries and toolkits that help you achieve similar functionality or similar look and feel on different devices, Sencha Touch, jQuery Mobile, libraries of that sort. They take care of much of the browser, the slight behavioral changes in the browser, and they make life easier for UI development.
Okay, I'm going to group some of these questions together. First, a bunch for Worklight specifically, and then for PhoneGap. Is Worklight open source as well? How does Worklight compare to some of the other application servers out there already, be it WebSphere from IBM or others? And just a more general question, how does one decide which platform to use? There are different approaches in the market. How do you compare yourself against some of the other approaches? And that's also a good question for Steve to answer after Ron.
Okay, so I'll start with the question about open source. Worklight is a commercial product. There's an evaluation version that you can download for free and try it out. And we do contribute open source portions to the PhoneGap project. So we are members of the PhoneGap project and contribute changes either to the core PhoneGap code or to several plugins and so forth. Regarding comparison to application servers, we like to think of Worklight as the extension of the world of application servers to the mobile world. Worklight can run as it's written in Java. It can run on many different application servers, and it extends the functionality of those application servers to include functionality that is unique for mobile. Support for push notification. Push notifications, for example, is something that is not available on application servers because it's not related to web. Disabling devices, integrated two-factor authentication, translating between authentication protocols supported on mobile devices and the authentication protocols in the enterprise, directly updating the portions of, or the HTML portions of PhoneGap-based apps. The Worklight server can send updates when the HTML code is changed. You can send that directly to installed applications. Remember that a primary difference between web applications and downloadable applications is that the downloadable apps are downloaded from an app store. They reside on the phone, and they require a different type of management than do web pages. And Yoni, the third question was, how do you select the platform? Is that right?
Exactly. How do you select the platform? What are some of the differentiators for Worklight?
Well, the things that we think differentiate Worklight from the other players in this mobile enterprise application platform or mobile consumer application platform domain is, first of all, our open approach and our and the fact that we selected to use PhoneGap as a core component of our architecture because of the openness and because of the fact that it lets you use standard technologies for cross-platform development. I think that we're the only mobile application, mobile enterprise application platform that is really optimized for custom development by real developers We provide an evaluation version of the platform which you can try out yourself. We're proud members of the PhoneGap community. Steve, anything you wanted to add about that?
I think you got it all.
Okay.
Some PhoneGap specific questions that are definitely surfacing as well. One question is specifically about the build service, and then a few on plugins. There is hunger for plugins, I can tell you that much. Okay, with regard to the PhoneGap build, is there any plan to start charging licensing or usage costs for the PhoneGap build cloud service?
Can I just let me just answer that one before we jump into the other ones?
Sure.
PhoneGap build right now is in beta and it's free right now, but there are plans to charge for PhoneGap build. PhoneGap itself is going to be free forever, and you don't need PhoneGap build to make PhoneGap apps. PhoneGap build just makes your life a lot easier. We're thinking we're pushing to get out of beta hopefully this week or next week, and when that happens, we'll be announcing the plans. And all I can tell you right now is that they're going to be cheap. It's gonna essentially just cover our server costs. That's all we're really aiming to do, cover the costs of hosting those servers. It's not a huge deal for us. There's no other real factor for us that we're striving for. Cool. Yeah.
Okay, great. When can we see a Twitter plugin for PhoneGap? Another question is around plugin for Visual Studio. Is there any coming up? In general, just about the interfacing between some of the third-party libraries that you bring into PhoneGap. How different approaches may compare jQuery Mobile and Central Touch. What are some of the factors? Which one is essentially better for PhoneGap to use for PhoneGap?
Let me start with the first one. Twitter plugin. I hear rumblings that it's being worked on. We actually work pretty closely with the Facebook guys to make that Facebook plugin. But a lot of our plugins we don't make. They come from the community. That's one of the greatest things about PhoneGap, that it's got such an active community. If you really want access to Twitter right now, you can Google OAuth Twitter plugin or OAuth, PhoneGap OAuth plugin, and then there's a couple articles that pop up right away that kind of walk you over actually using OAuth to access Twitter and stuff like that. So check that out. Next was about
Visual Studio.
Visual Studio, yeah, the Visual Studio plugin. It's similar in the sense I've heard people bring it up, but I don't know of anyone actually working on it currently. There might be someone that just hasn't announced it, but these things they usually happen in the community. If we can find a time to resource someone here at Nitobi, we would, but there hasn't been a big enough demand so far. Now that we've got Windows Phone 7 support, I wouldn't be surprised if there's much more demand, though. And the third question was
around jQuery Mobile and Central Touch.
Yeah. The framework choice is up to you. Here at Nitobi, we rarely use frameworks. We usually just do all of the UI in-house, and if anything, we use like a lightweight mini frameworks. Like XUI is pretty small, but even that might be too much. And our point is, with jQuery Mobile, you have to include jQuery, which is huge. And when you're developing for mobile, you don't always want to have a lot of loading in a lot of JavaScript files. It just slows your app down. So in Nitobi, we usually don't use much at all. But a lot of people use jQuery Mobile, and a lot of people use Tencha, and they both have their pluses and minuses. And it's kind of up to you. It's whatever your developers are comfortable with using. Even Sencha is also a very has a big file size too, but file size it matters less and less now because the phones are getting more powerful and they load faster and things like that. So it was more of a concern early on.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, there is no better one. It's whichever you prefer.
Okay. Next, will Worklight trial contain PhoneGap libraries, or do we need to integrate later by downloading PhoneGap?
PhoneGap is a core part of Worklight. It's bundled into the platform. When you download the trial version of Worklight, you get a development environment in which you have a single-click project creation functionality, and that automatically includes all the required PhoneGap libraries as well as some additional Worklight libraries as part of the project. Essentially, just click a few buttons and you've got a running app.
Great. We just have about room for one or two more. Steve, there was actually another question on a plugin that I did not include, and that was with regard to barcode and QR code scanning.
Oh,
are there any plans?
That plugin, I think I read that question early on. It asked if we're going to be integrating it into PhoneGap. We're not integrating it into PhoneGap, but there are plugins that already exist for it, and you can include them and include it in your project. So.
Okay. And then question, does the phone need to have internet connection to run the apps? Can they run when you're offline?
Oh yeah, they can totally run offline. That's one of the beauties of PhoneGap. You can, if you don't rely on pulling data or whatever, and you can store all the data locally, and all the HTML files should be local anyways, so, and CSS, and everything should be local. But if you use XHR requests to get data from servers and things like that, then you're going to need an internet connection, obviously, but you don't need to do any of that. You can do it completely offline.
Yeah, it's, the reason that you'd want the HTML, CSS, and JavaScript files stored locally is for performance reasons. The app starts up and the files are already on the device. There's no waiting for them to download from the server. And we built heavily on that ability of such apps to run in offline mode when there's no connectivity, in order to extend that. Parts of the Worklight platform include encryption of data that you want to cache for offline use, and mechanisms to allow authentication of users even when there's no connectivity to the enterprise, things of that sort.
Great. Thank you both, and thank you for the questions. We're just coming up on time. I want to thank you for participating in this joint webinar. Thank you, Steve Gill from Nitobi, and thank you, Ron Perry from Worklight. We will be following up with you after the session and sending the recording. I encourage you to visit the links you see right here on this slide for additional resources and for upcoming webinars and activities. Thank you.